Hello and welcome back to Retfurb. So on today's video we've got this WTB Rocket V Titanium seat that I'm going to show how to recover it. Obviously you can see straight away that it's in pretty bad shape. So let's get straight into it, and I'm going to remove the trim at the bottom of the seat first. This is held on by 3 Phillips screws. So obviously this seat's a little bit newer than what I would normally do. I normally try to keep it sort of pre-2000 items. I think this is probably about 2002, something like that. But yeah, as you can see, it's not in the greatest of condition. So I thought it was an ideal video just to show the process of recovering it. I know I've done a few other videos now, but this one's slightly different seat to the rest of the ones that I've done. So I thought it'd be a good one that I can show and go into a little bit more in depth in what I've done. So that small little logo on the underside of the trim, that needs removing, and then you can see another screw which holds on the front trim that goes underneath the seat, so that can be removed. Then you can just prise up the trim. You can see there it sort of flicked off as I was doing it. So you can see underneath there's staples that hold it in to the main part of the plastic that's underneath, so these need to be removed first. So I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver just to go around and prise them out. As you can see, they're coming out pretty easily. Doesn't really take much effort, just a little bit of time to go around and remove them. So I bought this seat to go on the GT STS that I've got. I've got the Serra Italia Flight Titanium on at the moment, but I know a lot of GTs back in the day had the WTB seats, and I quite like the look of this one, plus it's titanium, which I wanted to put on there purely just to keep the weight down. So you can see I'm just working around, removing the staples, and then once the staples are removed, you can start prising off the old covering. Now I don't think it's actually leather on here, I think it's some sort of synthetic vinyl, but obviously it's the same sort of process, it just needs peeling off. So now just working all around the seat, just peeling off the old material. So once you sort of peel it off from underneath, you then move around to the top. You need to be as careful as you can when you peel it off the foam. Now this seat, as it happens, was really good. It came off really easily, so it didn't sort of rip any foam, or it didn't leave too much of the covering on it. Whereas I've had other seats that once I start peeling it off, it starts ripping the foam off, especially some of the Serra Italia seats that I've done. They've sort of peeled the foam off. It's obviously been stuck down really well, which you can't knock. It just obviously makes it harder when you're trying to recover it. So you can see there I'm just trimming little bits off, just carefully pulling it off, just going slow, making sure that I'm not ripping any bits of foam off. If you do get to any sort of resistance, you just need to go slow around the area and just take your time and try and peel it off with as least damage to the foam as you can. Obviously if you damage the foam, you then need to try and sand it back and get rid of any of those marks that you've left on there. So as you can see, it's come off really well. A little bit of excess covering that was left on there then, which we're just picking off. So all I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to sand off the back section where the logo was, because it's left an indent. So where the WTB and the Rocket V writing was on the back, it left a bit of an indent. So I'm just going to go around and sand that off. I'm not just going to show it, but I use a belt sander the same as I did on another video, and that'll just smooth that off. But all the top markings, the lines, I'm going to leave on there. I just think it might look quite good when the leather covering's put back on top. So now this is fast forward, and I've sanded it down, as you can see. I'm just pointing that out, and I've also glued the foam back onto the plastic because that had come apart. So I've bought some 1mm thick leather, although I would say it's probably a little bit thicker than that, as I found out when I started putting it on. Obviously the thicker the leather or the thicker the material, it's harder to wrap it round and form it back. So it's hard with leather because it's natural, you do get different thicknesses, but obviously the person or the company that I bought it from had it advertised as 1mm, but you've got to take into account that it is natural and it does have sort of deviations in the thicknesses. Obviously when you buy something that's synthetic, you can buy a 1mm thickness and it pretty much is 1mm thickness all the way through, but being a natural product you don't always get that. So now I'm just trimming it, making a smaller piece, just enough to cover the seat. I don't want to go too mad on a waste of material. And now just making sure that I've got enough to go around and wrap it around all the edges. So now to get it ready for the spray contact adhesive. So I'm just going to apply this to the actual leather piece itself, and also then to the seat foam, trying to sort of minimize the amount of glue that goes everywhere. I don't want to sort of spray it on too much underneath if I can help it. Obviously it just makes it harder when you've got to clean it up. You'd have to use a solvent based degreaser, which will remove it, but it's obviously just makes it a harder job, which, you know, I've done it before and I've sprayed it and I've made a mess underneath and cleaned it up. It's been fine. It's just, you know, trying to do this one a little bit less of a mess, which is easier said than done sometimes. So I'm just going around carefully all around the edges, all around the top, just giving it a coating. Obviously once you start fitting the leather covering on, you can apply more as you need to anyway as you go, because it will dry obviously, and where you're peeling it on and off, it will sort of pull some of the adhesion off. I always find it best to use the spray adhesive on this because it just gives a better, more uniform covering, whereas if you try and use a brush on impact adhesive, sometimes it goes a bit lumpy. So doing it like this, it just gives it a nice even coat over the surface. So you can see now I'm just starting to put the leather on, just starting to sort of put a bit of pressure on top, but what I want to try and do once I'm sort of got it stuck at the front is just pull it towards the back, and then I can start smoothing it into some of the sort of contours and that on the seat, and then stretching it again round to the sides. You need to do this. If you don't stretch it as you're fitting it, you'll find it even harder once you try to form it around the corners, especially the nose and around the back, sort of right and left sides of the seat. Obviously being a natural leather, it's a lot easier to form than a synthetic vinyl. As you'll see on some of my other videos when I've done that, I've just found it so hard to try and do that. So just continuing to stretch the leather. And as I'm doing that, I'm just trying to sort of form it into some of the grooves in the shape of the seat on top. So you can see straight away that it's formed quite well into the top grooves and that where the old covering was and where the old stitching on the old covering was. And now I'm just applying a bit more adhesive around the sides, just making sure I got enough so when I start pulling it around further, it will start sticking to the foam. To this video, I've done a little bit more in depth than the other seat videos that I do. I've just tried to not cut too much out. I've tried to sort of do it so it's not too much missing, so you can see the whole process involved. So you can see here I'm just trying to form it more on the sides and then just starting to trim some of the excess off. I'm not going to sort of the full trim at the moment, just trimming off a little bit more, making it a bit more manageable to work with. Obviously you've got to be very careful when you're trimming it. You don't want to trim too much off and then be stuck afterwards with a short piece. So again, just stretching that leather around the back of the seat. This is where the main sort of patience is required when you're doing this, because you need to keep forming it, keep pulling it, getting those wrinkles out. Like I said, this leather is a little bit thicker than I would say 1mm. It's not too bad. I did do a seat recently on another video, a brown covering. That was a Sail Italia Flight Titanium again, and that was sort of 2mm thick leather, and that was a lot harder to form around. Again, easier than a synthetic vinyl, I would say still, but the thicker the material, the harder it is to form, even when it is a natural material. So with this, yeah, it's a little bit thicker than 1mm, but it's still better than using a synthetic vinyl. You can see here I'm just trying to form that round, just keep sort of stretching it, pulling it, manipulating it around the corners and around the underside of the seat, trying to get that as smooth as possible on the shown edges. I hate getting wrinkles even underneath, it does my head in, but sometimes you just gotta do it, and once it's tucked in underneath it isn't actually shown, so it's not too bad. And also on this seat you've got those trims at the front and the back which hides a lot, which is probably the reason they did it, to be honest. Another reason I wanted to do a WTB seat is because recently I did a GT Pantera build, which is also on the YouTube channel, and it had a WTB seat on that. It was an older type, but it was so comfortable, so I thought, you know, this one looked ideal, a nice one to restore and get it back to usable condition again. Obviously it's not going to be looking the same as what it did before I started, as in, you know, obviously it was a bad condition, but I mean the finish, what the Rocket V looks like, it's got sort of stitching on top and different sort of colorings on there, which this is just going to be now all black, obviously. So you can see I'm just trying to still get that formed in underneath enough, not too many big wrinkles there, trying to stick it down as best as possible. Also, you can use a bit of super glue just to hold some of those bigger wrinkles underneath if you get issues with this sort of adhesion sticking those thicker bits. The spray glue sometimes doesn't hold it quite as well when you've got big thick wrinkles there. So sometimes you can use a little bit of super glue just to hold that down, which I did on this seat. I put a couple of little blobs in around, which you'll see later on, just to hold that down firmly. And I'm just trying the trim on to make sure that I've sort of got those wrinkles down flat enough to get that trim back on fitted okay. As you can see there, not too bad, you know, I'm pretty happy with that. It'd be hard to get any better than that with the thickness of the leather. So now this is the hardest part of the whole job, trying to get this front nose fitted correctly and get that formed round. It's inevitable that there's going to be a lot of wrinkles here, but I'm just going to try and tuck them under and hide them so you don't actually see them from the sort of front and the sides and the top of the seat. So just pulling it as best as I can and stretching it to lose the wrinkles in the leather. So you can see there, not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. Just to try and finish it off now and make sure that it's all stuck down, but overall it's pretty good. So like I said just a minute ago, use a little bit of super glue just to blob on some of those thicker wrinkle bits underneath, and that should hold that in place then, and there should be no issues. And again on the front nose as well, just putting a few blobs around. And then once the glue's dry, we then look at fitting the small trims back on the underside of the seat. So the first one to do is the front trim. This is just held on by the Phillips screw. And then the rear trim that's underneath, which is 3 Phillips screws or crosshead screws. So as you can see now, the trims are fitted back on. It hides a lot of the worst wrinkles that are underneath. Not that they're really bad, but it just hides obviously the worst of it. And you can see now looking around it, it looks pretty good. There's no sort of issues. It's formed really well on the top into all the small grooves and everything that I left purposely. Now just sticking on the small little badge that goes on the underside, which covers one of the front screws on the front of the trim. And now I've got some heat press vinyl which I've made. So I'm just going to put 3 WTB logos on the seat, one on the back and one each side. So just the same method as I've done on other seats. Just using the heat press vinyl, covering it with some heatproof paper, and then using the iron to just rub over the top, which will then stick it down onto the leather surface. So when you're doing this, you need to be a little bit careful. You don't want to go too mad with it because it will distort the decal. You just need to sort of do it gradually. It did go a little bit funny on this seat, but it wasn't too bad. You just sort of go over it gently and just keep checking it. It's best to keep checking it rather than holding it on there for ages and then sort of smearing it and it looks all deformed. So you can see it looks really good, that. And now on to the 2 sides. I've already done one at this point, so this is the last one just to finish that off. And that's it, we're just about coming to the end of it. Obviously I've kept it a lot more cleaner looking with the less decals on it. The old seat had the WTB on the back and the Rocket V on there. So as you can see, it's come out really well. I'm really happy with it. I do like the look of it. I prefer it a bit more cleaner looking rather than having all the multiple different finishes and everything on there. So yeah, all done and another successful refurb. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video, it's really appreciated. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.